Hi, this is Marc Elias, founder of Democracy Docket, with a look at what just happened in the week that ended, and more importantly, what to expect in the week ahead. So, the big news last week definitely came from the U.S. Supreme Court, where in a 6-3 order, you won't be surprised, along ideological lines, the Supreme Court allowed Donald Trump to dismiss people who were normally protected from dismissal except for cause. So, this case involved him firing people from the National Labor Relations Board and the Merit Systems Protection Board. But that's less important than the principle at stake, which is that Donald Trump has wanted to fire these very senior level people without cause. He wants to fire them just because he wants to replace them with people loyal to him. And for decades, that hasn't been allowed. Presidents have only been able to fire people from these independent boards and agencies if they do something wrong, if they, violate the law or, are involved in some improper conduct. That wasn't the case here. And the Supreme Court, in really a shadow docket ruling, right? This was not briefed and argued on the merits. This was just on an emergency basis, really overturned 90 years of precedent that protects these independent agencies from undue political presidential influence. This will have broad repercussions potentially throughout all kinds of independent agencies and boards throughout the executive branch. So please make sure you follow this. Democracy Docket will be covering it. The other big news, a series of losses, once again, for Donald Trump in the lower courts. A federal judge stopped Donald Trump's dismantle of the Department of Education. Another federal judge blocked his effort to target Harvard University with retribution by preventing them from enrolling foreign students. A federal judge said that Donald Trump's administration violated a court order by illegally deporting migrants to countries other than their own without giving them adequate notice and a chance to object. That was just some of the losses that the Trump administration experienced in court this week. Unfortunately, I think their big lasting victory, or at least the precipice of their lasting victory, and the thing that we all need to be paying attention to, is their budget bill. Now, the budget bill is terrible for a whole host of reasons that are beyond my expertise. It cuts healthcare, it will raise prices on Americans, and of course, it gives tax breaks to the wealthiest of the wealthy. So it's bad for a bunch of reasons. But one of the reasons why we have focused on it at Democracy Docket is that it includes a provision that will make it harder for federal judges to hold the Trump administration accountable. Now, that shouldn't be a shock. After all, what else would Republicans in Congress be putting in a budget bill other than something to immunize even further Donald Trump from accountability from the courts? But that's in the version that came out of the House. This bill will now go to the Senate. We at Democracy Docket will be watching that provision and anything else that they may try to stuff into it that undermine democracy carefully. So please take a moment right now. Make sure you are clicked to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Also that you get alerts by hitting the bell. And also make sure you're subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters, or become a premium member. The links to all of that is in the description of this episode. So let's pivot now to what we expect to be happening next week and what we are watching. The big thing I continue to watch is the U.S. Supreme Court. Why? Because we're getting to the time of the season in which the big decisions from the Supreme Court tend to get handed down. Now, we're not at the end of the end. That won't come until the end of June. But we're at the beginning where we're starting to see these big cases be decided. And the one that I am particularly focused on is the redistricting case out of the state of Louisiana. This is a huge case, not only for the congressional midterms, because it will decide likely whether there are two majority black districts for voters in Louisiana in 2026, or whether there's only one. But it's also a big case because it is a frontal assault on the Voting Rights Act. I know what you're going to say, Mark. Isn't there always a frontal assault of the Voting Rights Act going on? Yeah, there are multiple efforts to undermine the Voting Rights Act, but this one sits right now before the 9 justices. The theory that has been argued by a group of voters in Louisiana is that they were discriminated against. Wait for it. White voters were discriminated against because the state of Louisiana had to comply with the Voting Rights Act. It is a specious argument. It is not one that is worthy of the Supreme Court even taking up, but nevertheless, here we are, and we are awaiting a decision in that case. So please make sure you are following Democracy Docket. They will be the first to cover that case and all of its ramifications as soon as we get it from the U.S. Supreme Court, and that could be as early as next week. Now, there are a number of other cases in the Supreme Court that are in earlier phases where the Republicans and their allies are trying to get the attention of the Supreme Court to hear cases. So these are cases that they lost below, they lost at the Court of Appeals or the district court level, that they are trying to say, hey, Supreme Court, take this case so that you can undermine free and fair elections. One of them, which was distributed to the justices for a conference on May 22nd, which was last Thursday, involves the Illinois ballot receipt deadline. Yeah, I know you keep hearing this from me, and that's because it's super important. I'm telling you, Republicans are trying to curtail mail-in voting. One of the ways they are trying to do that is banning drop boxes. We've talked a lot about that in the past. Another way is through this attack on the receipt deadline. If you cast your mail-in vote, say the Tuesday prior to the Tuesday election day, right, giving it full 7 days, but it doesn't make it because the mail is slow, and maybe it arrives on the Wednesday or the Thursday, but it's been postmarked before election day. My view, your view, undoubtedly, that ballot should count. Many states, that ballot should count. Well, guess what? Republicans want to strike down those laws, not let it count. And that is what is at the heart of this Illinois case. Although it is before the court on more procedural issues, it is still worth following. We are still waiting on the Supreme Court to decide whether DOJ gets access to the Social Security database. I mean, what could go wrong there? A lot. We're also waiting for the Supreme Court to rule on the Trump administration's request to allow widespread layoffs in the administration. And of course, at all times, there has to be another fringe effort by the right wing to put in place the independent state legislature theory. And that is still awaiting in a cert petition that Republicans have filed out of the state of Pennsylvania. That will get distributed to the Supreme Court conference on May 29th. So we're not going to get a decision on it this week. But as a reminder, Republicans are invoking the independent state legislature theory over a state Supreme Court decision, allowing voters to cast a provisional ballot if their ballot was rejected in the state of Pennsylvania. So you'll hear about this more in the future, but start to pay attention to that now. Now, not everything that's happening that is important this week is happening in the U.S. Supreme Court. I want to particularly call out and have you focus this week on what is going to happen in Alabama in a federal case involving congressional redistricting. Now, you all probably remember, because you, of course, read Democracy Docket's newsletters, you watch its, you read its content on its website, that the state of Alabama got really sideways with this 3-judge panel when it passed a new congressional map that violated that panel's court order to create 2 majority black districts. It was ordered to do so. What did the state of Alabama do? Well, it enacted a new map with only 1 majority black district. So it not only lost that case, but the 3-judge panel said, we're going to have a remedy hearing to talk about how we move forward. And among the things we're going to discuss is whether the state of Alabama, you need to be back under preclearance. What is that? You may remember that in the Shelby County decision, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the requirement that states with history of racial discrimination in voting have to have their changes in voting laws, including their redistricting maps, reviewed in advance before they could go into effect. But the Supreme Court left in place a section, so-called Section 3, which says that if there's specific evidence that a state is continuing to discriminate in voting, it can be thrown back into that preclearance regime. Well, guess what? Alabama did something that has these 3 judges perhaps ready to throw them back into that preclearance regime, so-called bail-in. And so this is going to be a must-watch hearing on Wednesday. And I'm going to tell you, the folks who are going to be watching it the closest, the folks who are going to be reporting it out, the folks who are going to be giving you all the context will be the big team at Democracy Docket. So please make sure you are paying attention to them, their newsletters, as well as their website, and also on this YouTube channel, where you will undoubtedly get an update from me and Paige Moskowitz next week as soon as we have a readout there. Look, I know that this is a lot. I know you got a lot of stuff competing for your attention. I know there's a lot of news. But the most important thing to the future of our democracy are the free and fair elections that we need to have in 2026. And there is no better source for that information than the team at Democracy Docket. Please Make sure you're subscribed to its free daily and weekly newsletters. If you want more than that, become a premium subscriber. The links to all of that is in the show notes below. I will see you next time.